Hi, welcome to the XY Chromies, Confidently Uncertain, a show where two Army vets turned renewable energy engineers talk veteran issues, science, engineering, geopolitics, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pearson Guest, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How's it going today, Richard?
It's good to talk to you, Pearson. Good to see you.
It's good to talk to you as well. All right, you're already drifting over to the right, so drift over to the left a little bit. We're
All
and
right,
on
I'm
that,
drifting.
that's right. And on that, we're doing episode 32. And today we are free-forming it. So we're going to get right into it. I have been listening to a couple of things recently. One of those is a series on Lawrence of Arabia. And then also, I just happened to be listening to a Decoding the Geopolitics episode from one of the foremost CIA analysts experts on the Middle East, like war in the Middle East. And he's breaking down why the thesis is why Arab armies tend to lose wars, um, which he altered that thesis to be why do they underperform when they shouldn't? Because he thinks that's a misnomer and that Arabs armies have won wars in the past, most notably, but wars that they should have won more easily or better outcomes should have occurred. Like even like the Iraq Iran war, he references often as one of these wars specifically. Um, and so those are the things I've been kind of, which is funny because these are both very tied together subjects, but I got to them through different parts of my channel ecosystem, so to speak. How about yourself? What have you been getting into?
The material that I've been listening to lately has my audio book I'm currently listening to is one on secure relationships, and it's off our topic now. The book's title is "Secure Love: Create a Relationship That Lasts a Lifetime." And
Nice.
reflecting back on sort of when we began all of this, I was talking a lot about how our brain works and um, how I've learned the way that mine is kind of haywire. And as I've worked on this, where I've arrived at is that okay, I have a sense of what that function is with the autonomic nervous system, how that changes my interactions with other people, and what this book by Julie Manano talks about is she gets more into the attachment theory. She gets more into um, if we come away from uh, our families of origin with attachment styles that are disorganized or avoidant, um, it's going to wreak havoc on our relationships. And I'm here to tell you that I have a N of one that would back up her or support her theory here.
Yeah.
And so the book goes into a great deal of detail about okay, so what are these different attachment styles? What can cause them, and then how do they interact? How is it that people that have an attachment style that's anxious and an attachment style the other person has one that's avoidant? How is it they always find each other? And how is it that there's this dominant number of exchanges where one is basically fleeing from the other, and that's the essence of the relationship. And so, this book, "Secure Love: Create a Relationship That Lasts a Lifetime" by Julie Manano, is uh, instructive in this. And I've been getting, sometimes you listen to something and you go, okay, I'm going to need to listen to that about 8 more times before it really begins to sink in because it's
Yeah.
it's some complex material, but it's definitely worth checking out if you're in our audience and you feel like either one, you did not grow up with a secure attached relationship in your family system, so that's me. Check right here. And then two, if that's ever created challenges or created problems in relationships that you would have otherwise stayed in or would have otherwise enjoyed being with that person, but the relationship just could not last because of that tension between yourself and another person, which it turns out reflects back on your attachment style. So,
Yes. Well, I think it's it's great to circle back around to us, talking about generally exploring your mental uh, particulars, right? The things that make you you and that have been imbued upon you in part by uh, the way you were raised or not raised,
Mm-hmm.
um, and everything in between. I It was funny when you were talking about that. I was thinking about how um, I feel like my life has gone to a point where I go through these phases where it's like, oh, it's time for some self exploration, and I'll do these intense 3 to 6 months of kind of serious introspection. And we've had conversations during this
Mm-hmm.
period and reflection and lots of conversations with my wife as well. And where we, you know, come to new conclusions or whatever, new periods of self realization or whatever. Uh, and then it's more laying, then I stop, I just generally am like, all right, well, like we've reached that state. Let's let that settle in, that new phase of mental state, see how, like trying on a new pair of clothes feels like almost for me, where,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, oh, okay, I'm looking through this world with a different lens here, based on how I perceive my own thinking and how that reflects with my kids and so on and so forth. And, um, so I think it's really cool to watch, to see my friends as well do the same thing and go through their
Mm-hmm.
different stages. So one, that, um, and then the second thing is attachments. It's so bizarre how they come about, and they're almost they're almost a miracle of just whatever the right of timing more than anything else. I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes like it's hard to say like, well, why am I attracted to this person? It's like, well, maybe it's your state of mind at that time too as well, right? Which made me think about that and like what phase you are. My Sarah will joke, haphazardly, but she's pretty serious about it. She's like, if we would have met each other in high school or your first round of college, she's like, I would have never dated you, and
Right.
you know, and she's probably right. She's like, I would have hated what type of person you are. I'm glad I met you when I did, and of course, I would have tried to date her no matter what time it would have been, because but I can understand, and she would have been right not to date me at 21 or
Mm-hmm.
22. So yeah, thank God. Anyways, those are my thoughts right there about that.
One of the things that's come up about not this book specifically. I don't think Julie Manano specifically talks about this, although like I said, I have to listen to it 8 more times.
Yeah,
Um, there's this idea that the relationships that are formed in our that develop and we are socialized into in our developmental years will play this role in what we're who we are attracted to, and more importantly, what they mean to us from what we're trying to work out or resolve or solve from those primary initial relationships. And I said that kind of clunkily, so I'll try it one more time. Another way to look at it is the people with whom we get into relationships, the people that we're attracted to, somehow represent a opportunity for us to fix or reform or repair something that was a fracture in our developmental years. And that's not that's a on a gradient for everyone. For some people it's really severe and really obvious.
yeah,
For other people it's not quite as obvious and maybe a little attenuated, but it's because um, it might not be easy to see. Like in an avoidant person like myself, you probably can't really tell that I'm trying to work out something that's a fractured part of my development, because it's going to be mostly about me avoiding everyone.
yeah, yeah, and you just avoid the topic, avoid sharing it, and avoid people seeing you in a state where they might be able to pick up on it. Yeah,
Yeah,
so yeah, you're just wearing all different types of camouflage, and if not, you're just fade into the mist, escape.
right.
Yeah,
So very few people would look at me and say, "Oh, well, you clearly are. You very social, Richard. You give public, you speak publicly. You do these
yeah,
things that are, you have friends. I mean, I don't understand what do you mean that you're avoidant? Oh, the part where you and I have a conversation every week, we wouldn't do this If you didn't if you didn't move this along, if you weren't the one driving this,
Yeah.
it wouldn't happen if it was left up to me. And it's not because I don't want to have the conversation. It's because constitutionally, why get something started? Because if you get something started, you might have to finish it. And who has the energy for that?
Yeah. That's right.
So,
Well, good thing or bad thing is podcasts. They could be forever. Dun dun dun. So you just don't have to worry. It's you just finish it or die. There you go. No.
exactly.
Yeah.
There's no loop to close on this.
Well,
But thanks for asking. That the relationship thing. It seems like it was a totally different topic, but we were on the topic of things that we're learning about, or books that we're listening to, or
no,
topics that
for
we're
sure.
covering.
Yeah. I think it's you know, it's it's interesting because I hear so many people are lonely, and I hear so many people um don't have that many friends or anything like that. And sometimes I feel like it's tough because when you're young, it seems like there's a larger volume, but these are just people that were around you, when
Proximity.
yeah, they're in your proximity. Um, and it takes a while to suss through whether those friends are just proximal friends or if they were friends that you value worth keeping. And I've gone through those phases in my relationship. I mean, your circle shrinks, and as you get older, it shrinks naturally, anyways, because
Mhm.
people die. You work at companies, and you might get work friends, and those colleagues could be, people that you maintain friendships with throughout your career and onward. That happens. And there's these different phases where you get these friends along the way. But I feel like, yeah, my 30s have very much felt like, especially my late 30s, is where you really start to go, these are the friends that I value using my time up with. Like especially as you get older, you realize your time is more and more valuable, obviously,
Right.
as more people require time of you, because as you get older, if you're doing things, I guess, generally the right way, no matter if your career is adiabatic, no matter what kind of job you have or what you're doing, as you get older in your life, your time should be used up more. People should be
Hmm.
using your time. They should be requiring your time because you've advanced along your career in some fashion, and therefore you have more wisdom and experience there for more knowledge and skill and to impart on people in some way or another, whether that's professionally or even privately, with hobbies and stuff. Stuff just takes more time
Hmm.
until you retire, and then you have a lot of time and you die. But yeah,
There's a concept that's baked into it, the transition from adolescence into adulthood. It's called pruning, and what what is hard to actually describe, even though it's so basic and simple to us. It's um, it surrounds us. We don't see it. It's this idea that our the internal state of our mind and the physical structure of our brain changes throughout this decade of our adolescence. And so we emerge on the other end of it at age 25, 26, or thereabouts with this brain that's different. And it's different in a couple of ways. One, there are there are neurons and pathways that we prune and we stop using because they were of great use to us at age 7 or 10, but stopped being useful to us throughout our adolescence. Two, we were really reprioritized in adolescence. This is the theory that there's not a lot of horny 9-year-olds, but there sure are a lot of horny 15-year-olds.
yeah,
So we have a brand new approach to seeing the world, and that we prune away things that don't fit that model of our developmental period. And the other part of that is alienation, where those circuits that we prune away, the ones that remain, we coat in insulation. That's happening as a consequence of chemical the when I say the chemical changing process, in other words, adolescence introduces all these different new endocrine chemicals, and those affect our brain.
so I would say, if you seen Inside Out, they do a really good job of explaining this transition. You start to see these
Mm-hmm.
core memories or core attributes about
Mm-hmm.
it's a young girl they're following in
Mm-hmm.
this case, and watching how, and then in the second one, watching these emotions get replaced as not the primary or core emotions, right? And with more
Yeah.
subtle emotions like disgust or envy, you know, and all these things. That weren't like primary, like anger, sadness, you know, more basic emotions. They do a really good job of kind of letting people visualize what you're describing occurring.
Right.
One of the things that this, I know you were going this way, that, well, we're pruning neurons, and so naturally you're going to start pruning relationships that you've made as well. Like this is an
Bingo.
external version. So sorry to finish
Yep.
the thought. It sounded like that's
Yeah.
where you were going. Um, One thing that we've failed to do, or at least the secularists have failed to do in society,
Mm-hmm.
is create bastions for groups to find each other when they need to prune their family. And I feel
Right.
like this, my generation is probably the most keened into this, but Gen X, you know, is aware, just begrudgingly,
Right.
silently aware, to Gen
Yeah.
Xy to bitch about it too much about how they're aware. But I would say this idea that you're born into your family, but that doesn't necessarily mean you owe your allegiance to them if they're net unhealthy, they're a net negative to your life. And there's a, I mean, it's just statistically, if there's bad people out there, they have probably, you know, they could be bad parents and they have kids, and some of
Right.
those kids don't want to be like or around their parents, right? I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
interesting you brought up like how, in one way or another, all, you know, those people dictate who you're going to be attracted to. In a lot of cases, you go
Yeah.
for the opposite. Some people go for the opposite thing that both their parents are because they, you know, their parents were not great. um, or they'll be begrudgingly
Yep.
attracted to certain things despite their parents not being great, and they'll be upset that that is, you're
Yeah.
like, am not happy that I'm
Yeah.
attracted to this quality, and I know why I'm attracted to this quality, and I still need to avoid it because, you know, it's like, so if you want to get meta in it, but yeah.
You're introducing this idea that we have a lot of insight and self reflection before going into um, impulsive behavior such as starting relationships, and so it's only
That's
like
hindsight.
a
I'm talking with
minority of people.
hindsight right now, by
Yeah.
the way. I just want you to know,
Yeah.
like, I'm not some all-knowing, like, oh, she's got all the red flags. Trust me, I like a moth to the flame.
So yeah, so you jumped ahead of me on the path, and I like that you did that because you you kind of modeling what I when I set up something like, okay, internally we're doing this thing with the with our prefrontal cortex. I also forgot to mention all that pruning and alienation is happening in our forebrain. Our forebrain is this fascinating piece of neurological equipment that we use to regulate internally, but we also regulate externally. And so what tends to happen is that the people that um, there's a correlation between those internal prunings that kind of remove or discontinue neurological connections and that neurologic tissue around uh, childhood stage development tend to avoid those people in their adult lives more and more. They tend to um,
Yeah.
don't update their address book for that person that they had a lot of fun with doing something that was rowdy and carousing and dangerous,
Yeah.
and then they pass a certain threshold, and that person doesn't get updated in the address book, and you stop talking to them. Now they probably changed on their own trajectory too, but if they weren't with you in that developmental process, they might get deleted, and so you end up in your
I
40s and yeah,
I was the one deleted by a lot of people
yeah,
because of my 18-year-old to 25-year-old self
yeah.
easily. I mean, I was a terrible influence. I that those age, especially when I was out of the house, I very much was playing fast and loose with life
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
rules and all of it. Um, You know, if it would have been like, oh, we need to study for a final tomorrow, or we're going to go party with like the Winterhawks and a bunch of hot chicks or
Mm-hmm.
some shit and a hockey team we wanted to go hang out with at 19,
Mm-hmm.
I, I was drinking with the Winterhawks all night
Right.
instead, right? Like we were drinking Goldschlager or whatever all night. Ugh.
Mm-hmm.
It's got so wasted on Goldschlager. I don't think I drank it for, I haven't drank it since. Yeah. It was
You pruned that from your mind when you when
prude.
you grew up a little bit.
I was yeah, yeah. I was puking gold flakes out of my nose. Anyways, just saying, I
Ugh.
was probably the person who was pruned. The first pruning I experienced was one of my really good, like one of my best friends in high school started dating a Christian girl, and my best friend, he was not Christian. He swore worse than I did. He taught me how to
Mm-hmm.
curse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and he started dating her. They fell madly for each other. He accepted Christ as our Lord Savior, and the rest was history. But the second he turned 18, they got married. And
Yeah.
I was like, barely, he had to fight to get me invited to the wedding, but it was it was over. Like, that was
Yeah.
like, it was like, I think the last time I was going to see him. I didn't know it at the time, but it was.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm mad. I don't like his wife because what the hell, you know, all of this. Of course, she's absolutely right. Like everything, like she was right. I mean, beyond the God stuff and everything like there, I was a terrible influence for what she had in mind, which was making a man of this guy to have babies and be a good Christian man and go get his degree and all that. And he did all that stuff, you know, he's doing really well. Um, and we talk now because I am not that. I did
Yeah.
move on and we did reconnect. And I'm not, you know, trying to get him to go drinking on a Tuesday night or something like, obviously. But yeah, I was that person who got pruned from a lot of people's lives. I realized,
Well, and there may
rightfully
very well
so.
be people.
Public, any of those who come by here, I understand. And cheers. If I was in your shoes, I would have done the same thing. It was probably a smart decision.
Um, well, that pruning happened both ways. You probably also were removing people from your life that didn't fit anymore with the stages that you were in, because
Absolutely.
they were perfectly good people that you had a lot of fun with prior to being married that didn't make it through that filter, and then before having kids didn't make it through that filter. So now there's a population of people with whom you associate with that made it through all those filters or who have been added later, but it is the external and meta version of what our brains are doing internally, and how they regulate internally reflects outwardly.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of been when I talk about that book about the relationships, when I talk about um, a lot of our early content, it's all been in service of trying to get my cognitive mind around the idea that a lot of things that were making my life more difficult and more painful were not cognitive. They were related to the way that my um, nervous system had a totally reactionary formula that was non cognitive. And that the only way that I was ever going to begin to change that was to become much more aware about what was going on cognitively, and also understand that the emotional part was necessary, it was adaptive, and the only problem with it was now it was really not being put to use in a good situation for that. So
I,
it's maladaptive in the present.
I've got two questions. You don't
Yeah.
necessarily need to answer them, but I'm just curious, just
Mm-hmm.
because this is a
Sure.
curious topic. We have talked about this before. As someone who has done quite a lot of psychedelics in my past, I'm curious, have you considered it as a potential form of continuing the exploration and introspection and treatment? So I guess those are my two questions. Like, first, have you? And then secondary, would you? If you haven't.
I have two different responses slash answers, and I do want to answer your question, which is I think that I'm going to miss out on that as a route towards where I want to go with this
Mm-hmm.
because um, I'll not ever do it. It doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah.
There's like the, I'm not going to talk about I'm not going to talk about this. I'm going to keep a thing personal right now.
Sure.
But I want to get this general idea out, and that is that there are these interesting things that to me are markers of a person trapped in a nightmare life. And what they try to do is to they're really seeking all these different ways to give themselves some comfort or peace of mind or have some agency in this nightmare life that they have around them.
Yeah.
And
Relief
I'm
or
not even
control.
yeah, exactly, relief or control. And I'm going to even like stop right there and not even identify what those things are at this point. I'm going to like cap that. And it's not that those are stigmatic to me or that, oh, if I did those things, I would feel lesser or that I think lesser of them. In fact, I'm even more impressed by those relief or control measures that people put in place because of just how adaptive they are for what is essentially a little kid operating a adult mech suit body and trying to use little kid thinking on how to get through this world.
Yeah.
And they're applying things that are destructive and a bad idea, but they're very creative. And they do fit that little kid's model of how you would be um, a more hardened target, so you couldn't be exploited as easily, or that you would have
Yeah.
a sense of agency because you endured something that now, like another person didn't do it to you, you did it to yourself, and you were fine with it because you had control over it. Right? That's the
Yeah.
idea. And so when we throw in this idea of the psychedelics, um, it's not that I see it as a shortcut because I don't think it is.
No.
I just don't think that they have very much value unless you do all the other things that I talk about doing.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Like they're this other thing entirely. It might give you a sense of, you know, increase your sense of wonder about the universe. I don't whatever, but the central the central work, the central labor that I'm putting into this is awareness about what's happening to me in the moment.
Yeah.
Until I see some hard data that a uh, let's see a dosage or maybe a course of dosages. It's what I was trying to think of. Is like
Yeah.
it's not a chronic treatment. It's like a course of dosage. Until I see that a course of dosages of LSD or psilocybin creates greater awareness of in me in the moment, I don't. That's not. That doesn't help me get to the direction I'm going at.
Sure.
What I
Sure.
what I want is moment by moment, not control over, but moment by moment interpretation of what my autonomic nervous system is doing in response to hazards and dangers.
So, having done both a lot, one thing I should say, well, first off, mushrooms and LSD are very different from each other.
I
Like
know.
they are,
I'm
but
aware.
but but they are. I mean, just for the users to know, like they are very different
Yeah.
from each other. The best short description I can say would be that when you're on psilocybin or mushrooms, you are a passenger along for the ride. So
Mm-hmm.
what Richard was describing is like not being in control or awareness. First, you're aware, but you're not in control with psilocybin. You are a passenger. You're there for the trip. That trip lasts as
Mm-hmm.
long as your body takes to metabolize the mushroom. For me, it's about half an hour because I it just doesn't affect me. It's not my thing. I've tried it a couple times. I sweat a lot. Maybe I'm mildly allergic to mushrooms or something, but it just doesn't really do anything for me. But for most
Mm-hmm.
people, you are a passenger. Um, with LSD, you are the driver, which means that if you are not enjoying the situation you're in, you can think about it and change the situation you're in. You are aware. One thing I can say for psychedelics is they do not work anything like alcohol or drugs that might change your memory or perception, you will remember everything. You're insanely aware of your senses. And that's why you never do psychedelics while you're feeling in pain, or if you have like if you are seriously injured and you do psychedelics, you will intensely feel the fibers and that like you're talking about, you
Right.
want to feel the neurosensors, you'll feel your brain actually working when you're on LSD and stuff like that. Like it is insanely introspective. It is an ego killer. Um, that is all to say, I totally agree with as it's really great that what Oregon is doing is exploring this
Right.
in a medical sense, because I do see there being benefits in the future. And I can understand either decision, but people should know that these are generally the effects that I've experienced and felt.
Hmm.
Uh, Specifically, the psychedelics are extremely dangerous for people who have certain neurological disorders, or
Hmm.
who have multiple personality disorder. I think it's schizophrenia specifically. Um, if you've ever been diagnosed with those things, people, I think it's easy to say to stay away from those type of drugs. Uh, but yeah, so those are my
Okay.
takes on that. I think it's a wise decision to wait until more medical sciences come out about it, because you
Hmm.
don't want your bro over here to just be like, yo, dude, whatever.
So one of the things that occurs to me on this topic is that for people to get the as we understand it now, for people to get the best outcomes or have the best experience or whatever, I try to think how I want to phrase that. In order for it to be a experience that gives them something of value,
Yes.
it's supposed to be cultivated, and there's supposed to be a another person there that you can trust as you go through it.
You're absolutely right. My wife says she is very adamant about this, because we've done LSD together, of course, multiple times. She never does it just to do it. You do
Yes.
LSD for a purpose. And
Right.
I did not follow those rules, but of course, she is far smarter and wiser than me. And I would totally agree now that I've had kids and had a lot of time to reflect. She's probably right. You should only do that when you for with a purpose. And
Yeah.
it sounds like the people who are experiencing PTSD, who have been who go through these treatments with a therapist
Hmm.
who's licensed and everything like that, that seems to be the right way to go about it if you're
Yeah.
seeking it beyond a fun experience. If someone's seeking to get therapy, I wouldn't suggest
Yeah.
just going and doing mushrooms by yourself to solve your depression or something like that. That makes no sense. You would absolutely want to do it with a mental health
So
professional and or someone you trust and all that. But yeah.
so when I introduce that idea, it doesn't universally obviate the drug, but if there needs to be some type of trusted connection between myself and the other person that I'm doing this with,
Yeah.
okay, I'm gonna delete the drug and just do that connection
Yeah.
because that's actually what I'm trying to work on here. I don't I how do I want to put this? I know that there is some advantage to doing it in the context that I've described, that is to say, in a safe environment with a person that you have a connection with.
Sure.
And also, um, I had a disastrous marriage that ended after 20 years.
Yeah.
So I'm reflecting on that and looking at, oh, well, each time there was a fracture or an injury to that relationship, it was because I was not in control of an emotional state that was either um, uh, hypo aroused, so really shut down,
Yeah.
or hyper aroused, really agitated.
Yeah.
And what I'm super interested in is what set up those two states. Why were they so far apart? And why was whatever it was we were experiencing so unbelievably um, unsafe or threatening to me?
Yeah.
Right. So looking at those things, I've been getting a long way towards accomplishing that through this path I've been using.
Yeah.
Like I've accomplished extraordinary things by ballroom dancing.
Yeah. Just getting out there and moving
Yeah.
with other people and
Yes, yes. So there's this feature of what we talk about with regard to mental health, which is about attunement with another human being, and in relationships, and what Julie Manano talks about is co-regulation. And then the last piece that she talks about in this book is this thing called repair. Because even if you are extraordinarily practice at co-regulation, you still are going to have situations that arise where there is a fracture, but the repair is what makes the relationship even stronger afterwards.
Yeah.
And I grew up with a deficit. I am so in debt in the repair skill set that that actually is what matters to me. So, great question about the psychedelics.
Yeah.
Totally not on my radar because I'm interested in learning things like how to co-regulate with another person, how to be cognizant of the how to be cognizant of what my respiration and heart rate is, because those are the antecedents to these really terrible feeling states where I feel really unsafe and really agitated or shut down.
Yeah.
And also then the last piece is, if those things come to pass, how do I then co-regulate with another person and downregulate those like frightened states, and how do I repair with that other person? So that is the through line to the skill set that I'm working on.
Yeah, totally.
I'm move, I'm making progress. Like I'm seeing evidence of it, uh, but I know that there's nothing that's going to speed me along that path. It takes time,
No, yeah.
and it
And
takes those
and
interactions.
I don't look at, for me, LSD is the most magical drug I've ever experienced. I don't mean this like, oh, I'm seeing like visuals or anything like that.
Yeah.
But what it allows you to do, and a couple of the things that, and why I know it does provide very good therapeutic help, is what it does is people call it an ego killer, but really what an ego killer actually means, and what that means is when your ego has been removed from yourself and you're thinking about your past experiences, you can critically analyze hard things that your
Mm-hmm.
ego stops you from even thinking about or exploring
Mm-hmm.
because it's embarrassing to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for people like us who've experienced lots of trauma,
Mm-hmm.
there's tons of that shit locked away, or even just things that we've ignored or disregarded because it's too painful to even explore. And what
Right.
LSD specifically does, it completely takes all the emotion out of it, and you just think about it, and you can talk. Usually when you're high with your friend or whoever, people you trust with LSD specifically, that's it's called also a truth serum for a reason. You start talking about your deepest truths with that person, and
Mm-hmm.
they need to be on LSD too, because it allows you to feel that trust circle, and of course, and you share just open experiences about it, and it is a very powerful thing. And sometimes it's what allows the floodgate to open, just being able to explore it without your ego, because you'll remember that afterwards, and you're no longer on LSD, but you remember now, and it's okay. Suddenly what
Mm-hmm.
it's done is it's normalized it to yourself. And something about normalizing things that are deeply shameful for whatever, and as a, I think anything bad that happened to you when you were a kid, because our emotions haven't fully formed, maybe we look at all of them as shameful occurrences because for whatever reason we were in trouble, whether we weren't supposed to be in trouble or it was completely ridiculous that we were in trouble. And a lot of times why we were in trouble was
Mm-hmm.
absolutely ridiculous. It was
Yeah.
authoritarian for the sake of being authoritarian. It was totalitarian for the sake of being totalitarian. It
Mm-hmm.
was there because that's what I'm supposed to do, is be hard on this person for reasons. No matter what they're doing, I need to be hard on them.
Right.
So like they're doing good things, hard on them. Bad things, hard on them. They'll have no understanding. They just need to know hard, or you're bad, or you fucked up. And our simplistic emotions probably look at that as a shameful experience, and you try to ignore or compartmentalize shame.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I'm thinking about this in real time, why this might be this way. I haven't thought about this
Right.
before, but I think LSD, what that allows you to do is to analyze it without the shame. And when you do that, you never look at it with shame again. It's just, it was an experience. It happened. And now you understand kind of why you have these, why you react this way, or like, and I have experienced that when I've been on LSD. Now, funny enough, I haven't done LSD since I had a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And since you and I had my breakthroughs and I started to have all those realizations, I have not gotten to do an introspective deep dive. I've done it all just naturally through conversations
Right.
with you and my wife, Sarah. So I haven't done it with the aid of LSD. I have talked with Sarah like, oh, I'm excited for a couple of years from now when the kids are at the grandma and grandpa's for a night. Maybe we
Right.
will, explore and kind of see where we're at now, like see what new. I don't think it'll be as beneficial as it used to be for me in the past because one thing about LSD I will say too, it's not like alcohol in the way or weed or anything where you forget an experience or you even forget the feeling. You kind of can remember it forever. And you can almost, if you've done LSD a couple times, you can kind of tap into that feeling of pure introspection where you kind of go, okay, oh, I am doing this. And it sticks with you. So that's all. I think it's important for people to understand, like to hear how a drug actually affects you, like the description of it. And
Mm-hmm.
I have a very intimate relationship with that drug where I remember a lot of the effects of what it did. Um, uh, and there's plenty of negative effects too. You will be
Mm-hmm.
up for hours and hours. The first time you do it, you'll be up for a long time. It'll be a pretty fun time, most likely. People, most of the problems with LSD are the people who give you a LSD. I will say that. This is that meaning that if, and I'm saying this to the wider audience because they should know, if your friend is ever
Mm-hmm.
offering you LSD, there, a lot of bad friends will try to give you too much. Never take more than a tab on your first time. And if you can, take less than a tab because it's an exponential drug. Like literally, the smallest dose your first time will affect you amazingly. Most people would suggest a tab for your first time. I would take an eighth of I would quarter it. I really would. I'm telling everybody out there, very small amount. And you will have a phenomenal time. And you don't need to take a lot. You really don't. It's one of those things where I realize less and less and less is more as I've gotten older. You barely need an LSD. Unless you're really trying to trip and like see visions and all that stuff, I guess you could take the full tab. But if you're not trying to do that, if you just want to reach that headspace where your ego is slightly killed and do
Mm-hmm.
some self introspection. Yeah, that's my last little bits on LSD there. My little quick lesson.
I think you hit up on something that I think is actually really the answer to your question, and that is, it's the people that can supply it. I don't want to talk to people that I buy lettuce from.
Those people are usually lovely too. Wait,
I
electric
definitely
lettuce?
don't.
No, no.
I definitely don't want to talk to people that are going to give me LSD. My antisocial tendencies are so severe.
I used to buy mine from medical professionals. Literal medical professionals were my
Mm-hmm.
drug dealers. So I felt pretty safe considering they were working for reputable hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
That's as far as I'll say, just so I don't incriminate anybody. But yeah, I felt pretty good about my connection. And even then, you're still having to associate with somebody. Yeah. So exactly. LSD probably is a great, where you're getting it from is a good answer for why to avoid people. Yeah. Anyways, I was very
Well, when we
curious. Go ahead.
uh, I'm doing a major grab the lever and change the topic
Oh, I was
move
about to
here.
too. So yeah.
When we were just about to hit the record button, you had mentioned that you were looking into um, T.E. Lawrence and his experiences in um, the Middle East and the Levant and in Cairo and so forth. And you were talking about it in the context of whether or not he was one of these bastards that ruined the world. And
Yes.
you want to set that
Yes.
up again?
Yeah. So real quick, I'm listening to one of my new favorite podcasts I've been listening to for a bit now, Behind the Bastards. They're local out of Portland, I believe. So, anyways, the host Robert, he's doing a 4-part series on Lawrence of Arabia, who was a real person, a real British dude. And I'm figuring out I just finished the first episode, and he's basically made it to the Middle East. He's made it to Turkey. And he went back to get his master's, and then he's gone to Turkey a couple times.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm at. It's very early. He hasn't started a coup yet in any government. He hasn't done any of the stuff. And I don't know much about it other than he did this. He started revolutions in the Middle East, and but they're basically getting us towards. This is the first time I've done one of their episodes where they're doing, is he a bastard? They're actually honestly asking the question. They've alluded to the fact that the host, Robert, has alluded to the fact that he doesn't think so. A couple of things that's made me want to do is, first off, read his books, or what he's written, Lawrence, because Robert's quoting some of his excerpts of his writing, and he's a phenomenal writer. Like, he's like really phenomenal writer. Like, and another thing that they've already dispelled is the fact that his homosexuality. They basically think he was asexual. Like, they're convinced he's asexual. I don't know why this is too important, but apparently it's like a common trope or meme that Lawrence in Arabia was gay, because of his relationship with his relationship with a younger assistant teenage water boy who ended up becoming like his companion. Not in a sexual way that we know of or anything like that, but they delved into this, and it was apparently important. So that's my setup so far. That's where I'm at, kind of. But yeah,
I'm gonna table the, or not take, I'm gonna take off the table the discussion of T.E. Lawrence's relationship tendencies.
Yeah.
And just mention that because he's a British citizen, the British culture really struggles with, just like our culture does, really struggles with prominent people in their history. If they didn't like have this idealized heteronormative, really out in the open, idealized version of human relationships. If it deviated whatsoever from that, it really is tricky in British history to tolerate, because it calls into all kinds of questions about, really the unfair and terrible way that their culture and ours has treated people who do not fit the cisgender heteronormative state of being a human being.
Must be religion might have a little bit of something to do with this.
Oh boy, does it ever! When you there's a couple of different works that both you and the audience might be interested in. I went ahead and bought the DVD of Lawrence in Arabia. It's a 3-hour long movie. It was made in the 60s.
I heard it holds up.
It holds up, man.
I'm gonna watch it.
It is totally worth it, especially if you're watching it at home and you can, pause it and even talk about it, or get up and take a leak.
Well, when I say I'm going to watch it, I mean, over the next 10 years, I'll get through it at some point with the kids, and 3 hours. I mean, it's going to be a while. I might be watching it when I'm my dad's age, and then I'll be like, I really appreciate, man, they don't make movies like they used to, anyways.
There is a, oh God, here we go. In the recos of the of history, in the recommends section, there was once a podcast called Friendly Fire. It's defunct now. The
Bummer.
People that were hosting it got into
crypto.
They got into they got into a dust up. There was some unpleasantness with social media. There was a whole thing.
Oh, okay.
I've uncovered what happened and have thought about it, but that's off topic here. The reason I bring up the Friendly Fire podcast, and you'll find it just about, if there's a media tool that you have on your phone that has podcasts on it, you'll find this Friendly Fire.
Okay.
And what they were doing, the conceit of Friendly Fire was, it was 3 people, none of which were veterans, but they they were interested in the cultural impact of war movies on American culture,
Hmm.
the impact of war movies on American culture. And you don't have to be a military veteran to have a opinion about this. They were looking at the art and culture perspective on this, but you know, a war movie is someone trying to resolve in their mind what this war's impact was on either them or someone they cared about or to our culture generally. And so they reviewed Lawrence of Arabia. There we go. I'm going to be careful because the
There's the
book I'm going to
book.
mention,
Yes, yeah.
it's Lawrence in Arabia. The movie is Lawrence of Arabia. So uh, their review of that movie is almost as good as watching the movie if you don't have time to watch the movie.
Ooh, okay. Dang, I like that. Sometimes I like the summary, for now because I might not be able to because it's one of the things I'm grappling with. I'm like, I want to watch this movie, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to watch it for like another 5 to 10 years. And I was just thinking, like, how do I get the TLDR of Lawrence of Arabia? But
Yeah.
you've just given me an opportunity to listen to a
Yep.
podcast, which I can definitely do while
Bingo.
taking care of the kitties or any of the
Mm-hmm.
other number of things. Dang, nice. That's good. Um, so a couple of the things so far that has struck me that is hilarious is that he walks everywhere. Like he's a walker. He walked. I
Yeah.
mean, he biked to Greece or he hitchhiked
Mm-hmm.
to Greece when he was like a teenager, like 17 or
Yep.
something like that. And what I get a kick out of is his mom, I get a sense, was overbearing and kind of a control freak. And he might be like straight up on the spectrum in a lot of ways, by the way. I was just saying, like, there's a, not that there was a problem with this, but he was like a genius in some
Yep.
ways so far. They're realizing, like, if he was the kind of genius, of course, like all geniuses, if he was into something, he knew it better than the teachers knew it. And if
Yeah.
he didn't care about it, he couldn't do it. Like, if he didn't care
Yeah.
about tying his shoe, he would have never been able to tie it. It was like that bad.
Yeah.
Um, so I learned this about him, and also, um, so he would write these letters to his mom that were kind of like snarky, like, "Ha, I'm in Istanbul now.
Yep.
Ha, I made it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you said I couldn't do it. I'm in, wherever. I'm in Venice now. Whatever. He's just on his way trying to get to the Middle East. And so there's this sense that he didn't ever feel like he belonged. And maybe it was
Correct.
something about him being born a bastard. Um, although his father was a really interesting dude. He
Yeah.
basically like fell in love after he was married, had daughters and not gotten sons. He ends up getting a mistress. She gets pregnant, has a son, and he's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, he just basically is like, you know what? He did something pretty noble actually. For a noble, unlike most nobles of the time, he was a man of money, status, and wealth, and
Mm-hmm.
he had a name. He decided to give it all up for the
Yep.
mistress
Yep.
and the wealth, like basically the wealth besides like a allowance that he could live on essentially and send his son to a nice school or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically was a stay-at-home dad. And
Yeah.
he like so Lawrence was like the most uh fathered son in history potentially,
Mm-hmm.
like at the time. I mean, no one had been parented by the patriarch figure in their lifetime. So, anyways, had a really close relationship with his dad. Kind of didn't like that his mom was the domineering, kind of the boss of the household.
Right.
Um, his dad not having a job probably didn't help that dynamic, I have to say. You have to imagine in the
Yep.
1800s that like Mrs.
Uh-huh.
Lawrence is all like, well, if your bum dad hadn't given up his wealth and blah blah blah, like he's like, I'm never gonna hear the end of it. Anyways,
Yeah.
so these are the things I've learned so far. It's really, he's got a fascinating setup so far for a story, I'll say this. um,
What anyone who studies or learns about T.E. Lawrence will eventually have to wrestle with is the idea that T.E. Lawrence is likely responsible for creating a national Arab identity. And this is a wild, wild concept because that national Arab identity comes out of the British and the French leveraging internal strife within the Ottoman Empire with Arab tribes to go to war with the Ottoman Empire and defeat them from internally, with the express desire of dividing up the Levant and Mesopotamia between Britain and France. This is the Sykes-Picot Agreement.
Is this how? Did France have Algeria by then, or is this how France got Algeria?
I think France had Algeria by then, and what France was going to get from the Sykes-Picot Agreement was going to be like,
Morocco,
uh,
or
and I can't quote this. I don't remember exactly, but it was going to be Jordan, or
and Lebanon and
right.
Jordan, basically. Yeah,
It was going to be something like that, and Britain ultimately ended up with Palestine, which is how we get the modern problems that we have now
yeah.
with Israel and Palestine. And so
Scheiße.
exactly, and so what goes on in the story of T.E. Lawrence turns out to be the foundational setup for all of this 20th century strife in the Middle East.
Well, and we've talked about how
Mm-hmm.
when the Ottoman Empire is going, we did go into
Yeah.
this like this series of. It was about 200 years, where up until 19 the World War I, where the Ottoman Empire ceased to exist. This is far before that, right? I mean, this is what 18. When was Lawrence over there? 1870s.
No, remember the part about this is so mind blowing. During World War One, between 1914 and 1918, this was all happening at the same time
Oh
the
shit!
as the fields of Flanders. I mean, we're talking about
Yeah,
a time when we talk about World War One being a world war, what we often forget is that there was this entire thing happening in the Levant, the Middle East, Mesopotamia,
yeah.
and with the Ottoman Empire
So every
in
country was gaining their
Anatolia.
national identity at like the same 20-year span. That was right. Like a bunch of countries were like, now we are
Yep.
the
As
Egyptians.
a
We're Egyptians now.
totally as a consequence of the way that Europe. So we're this is like uh, totally worth another entire program just talking about this one topic, but there's this whole construct where the colonial enterprise of Europe, and when I say that, remember the colonial enterprise of Europe was divided up by nations that had related monarchs but were nonetheless adversarial to each other. And the colonial enterprise was about exploiting the um, the continent of Africa and the historical Silk Road.
Yeah.
Because if you go back and listen to our segments on the Ottoman Empire one of the major um, was a major segment of the toll of the I want to say the major segment of the road, the Silk Road, the trade route from
Yeah.
Asia to Europe. And so Europeans despised this. They hated the fact that their their luxury goods were going through this tax zone and this tariff zone where they a bunch of value was being added, a bunch of expense was being added to these goods.
Yeah.
And so the colonial enterprise grew out of a need to find a cheaper way to get the things from Asia to Europe because when you could turn these super valuable luxury goods into commodities, you stood to become extraordinarily wealthy.
Yeah.
And that was the desire of the Europeans. So there was this there was this 500-year tension between the nations of Europe, including Great Britain, and the Ottoman Empire. World War One starts in 1914, and finally, after 500 years, the Europeans have the um, let's see, the inertia, I think. When we say inertia, I mean they had the trade routes, they had the economies of scale, they had the technological war machine, they had all these things. And a perfectly good reason to justify to their home country is why they needed to go and knock over the Ottomans. Because the Ottomans were sitting on an ocean of oil, which now the British fleet burned to sail the seas.
Yeah.
So the Ottomans continued to be in the way of European demands and desires and um, commercial enterprises, and so they needed to be dealt with. And T.E. Lawrence found himself in the middle of this during the First World War.
And he's like the foremost expert in the area from Britain
Yeah,
at that point, but just because he's so fascinated with that area, not
yeah,
because he's like, I'm going to go there as an agent of the UK to study this area. He was truly fascinated with the area. He felt like he belonged there. I mean, he was like,
yeah,
he bought into it. It's funny because I mean we're at the hour right here, so I'll say this. One of the things that's endearing about the British spirit, I'll say this, is he's writing these letters, and he would write things like, "Well, I went and got like malaria 4 times, and I thought I was only supposed to get it twice, but I ended up getting it 4 times, and so that was
mm-hmm,
annoying." And he just kind of
mm-hmm,
like he writes about like Brits always handle like this adversity, like malaria will kill, like this is
yeah,
malaria could kill you. I mean, he got it
right,
4 times instead of 2 times. Like but he'd write about the sickness, like, well, that happened, but
yeah, totally.
life goes on. He was just such a. I thought that was a very endearing idea behind that. The Brits really did have that attitude. I'd be curious to see what Churchill had to say about the Ottomans then, because I'm sure he was writing all kinds of op-eds at the time about how
Yeah,
we need to get that oil. If I had to
I mean
guess,
this is a extraordinarily rich period of history where what I always thought were things that were spaced a few years apart, like 10 years apart, all happened within the same 4 year period, and they represent the foundational global economic geopolitical problems that we spent the rest of the 20th century solving. And by solving, I mean, in some cases, diplomacy by any other means.
it's
And
almost
ultimately,
it feels familiar right now. I would say
yeah,
right
it
now
does.
in history feels a little a little comfortable, like it feels like that period of time in the world again right now this
Yep.
century. Maybe we're a little bit later to the party, 10 years later to some type of party that's getting ready to kick off, but we feel like we are just right there. Did you see that Ryan Macbeth? Shit. I'm going to make us go over another 1 minute. Do you see the Ryan Macbeth video about the, I think it was Charlie Kirk was calling, all we want is peace with Putin in Russia? And what he said about, he was at the NATO conference in Belgium, in Brussels, like last week. What he said about
I,
that
I haven't listened to that one yet. I was listening to Ryan Macbeth. Um,
on the Iron Curtain. He just spoke on that too.
I have to I, I I close all these things. Let's see. This is the Decoding Geopolitics podcast. So I
Oh,
listened to
yeah.
him on that program for the 17th. And so, he's got a lot to say about our current political situation that's really interesting. And, you know, uh, it's possible that American consumers will benefit tremendously if the next administration decides to use oil as the trade war to end Russia's aggression in Ukraine. So it's entirely possible that that's the thing that we'll be seeing. Prepare your summer trips.
Yeah. So, yeah. Anyways, to build on the tension, he basically said, like Charlie Kirk said, that we just want peace with Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, no matter what. And he said, Brussels is alive with talks from China right now. They see the election as a sign of U.S. weakness.
Mm-hmm.
Their perception of the U.S. is it's very weak, or it will be fully isolated or populist, and
Yep.
that if we stop supplying weapons to Ukraine, like in the next 6 months when the regime takes over, it's like a 99% chance that Xi by 2027 in February or 2028 of April, these two dates look like the dates,
Mm-hmm.
he's going to go for it. And
Yep.
nothing. And Ryan Macbeth and many of the channels I like to watch say nothing will kick off a world war like them going for Taiwan. That will be the one.
Yep.
It's not Russia
Yep.
stuff. It's going for the chips in Taiwan. That sets it off. So, anyways, something a little rosy to keep us sizzling beneath our butts. Yeah. A lot happened in 4 to 8 years. This last 4 years has been very busy in the world. So it's scary to think it's going to get busier.
We have this is the contemporary topic that we were introducing with globalization.
Yeah. Well, we'll get back to TN's. We'll get back to Lawrence next time, or I don't know where we'll pop around. But I've had a really enjoyable time talking to you. We've spanned quite the subject material today. So, with that, I better get back to the fam and let you get back to it.
Right on, man. Good to talk with you, and looking forward to our next conversation.
Absolutely, man. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.